So a lot of Americans right now, particularly right-of-center Americans, would think this is the American dream, that you're homesteading, you've got an acre of livable land, you've got 40 acres of farmland. There's one exception, though. You're in California.
I'm in California. So what does that mean? That means the income tax rate is 10 to 13%.
Right.
That means the schools are rated 46 in the nation. That means you got about a 10% sales tax. That means that even though it's 1 to 2% property, the evaluations are so inflated that you pay a lot of property tax. That means you have the most regulations. That means your infrastructure. Probably drove in the 99 freeway. You saw those four. It gets very narrow and dangerous. And we have illegal immigration. So we got all these. You can't go to San Francisco without seeing the detritus tragically of homeless people. So they were living on the street. That used to be a family little packing house, and when we started packing in the early 80s, there was one piece of paper on the wall for regulations. And when the time everybody said it's not worth it any longer, that whole wall was full of regulation, paper. And it would say, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to have this much lighting, you have to have this much ventilation, you have to have this much labels. These labels shall not be every peach must have a label on it. And it was just nonstop.
Are you happy here, or do you ever think about leaving?
Everybody who lives in California thinks about leaving.
So my question is it about, because one of the themes in your book, The Dying Citizen, is how maybe with the fact that we're so cosmopolitan now, we're so easily able to pick up our roots and go around the world and go wherever we want. I don't think we change it per se, but there is a negative side effect to it, which is that people don't have roots. They don't have a community.
I agree. And so I decided about 15 years ago, when my children went to college and were out and I was here alone, I thought, maybe I should leave or not. And I thought, why should I leave? Maybe the people who are screwing it up should leave. So they did the damage, not me.
But they're raising your tax rates.
Yes. So I said to me, I had an idea in my mind. I said, okay, if they're going to take 55% of my income, the federal, I'm going to make more. So people in my family said, you're crazy. I would get on the plane. I would write columns all day long on the plane. I would go speak. I would run from the speak. I would go do something else. And I said, I'm going to do more things than they can take from me. And then I got to be in my 60s. I said, this is kind of crazy, but I'm not going to leave now. I'm too old. And, it's kind of like a tsunami came over. This was ground zero.
Right.
Because this is where the illegal immigration was. This is where the high crime rates were. This is where the schools were dysfunctional. I put all my kids in the public schools. In grammar school, they were a distinct minority of so-called white kids. Everybody was Hispanic. And then it kind of split, but now it's kind of like, when you go over an area, the original area starts to adjust. So now most of the people that I know are Mexican American, my friends, and they're getting more and more traditionalist and conservative. They are more conservative, far more than the people I work with on the coast. And they're tired of it because they're middle class, they're working hard, and they can't make it, they feel. They can't be upwardly mobile. So whether a person works for the Highway Patrol or the Kearney Field Station or as a teacher, their ethnic fides is incidental now, not essential to who they are. Even as people like Newsom and all of the Stanford faculty think they talk about Latinx and Latina this and Latino, but it means nothing to these people. They're just people. And they're saying things for the first time. What's the price of gas? Why are we paying $5? Why are we paying 27 cents a kilowatt? Why does the 99 between Visalia and Delano a death trap? What is that Stonehenge thing called high-speed rail in Fresno? It just sits there like a fossil, like a dinosaur. So they're asking questions that the elite can't answer, really.
And this is where I grew up in California and spent 26 years here. And I went to school at UC Berkeley, and so I lived in Los Angeles. And the problems today are the same as they were 30 years ago, at least 20 years ago when I started paying attention to politics. The homelessness is horrible in major cities. Illegal immigration is causing so many problems, making healthcare very expensive, making schools unusable. Traffic is horrible. Airports are horrible. There's more crime in the cities. I want to expand a moment on farming and how the policies of the governing class have hurt farmers in the center of the state. But it seems like the only solutions that come out of Sacramento and look at the various mayoral mansions throughout the state, are more solar panels. That seems to be number one solution. And the next thing is, blasting what few Republicans are left. It seems like the people of the state might want more from their leadership, but they don't for some reason. Do you have any insight into that?
Three things happen. Silicon Valley has about $6 trillion now in market capitalization. So they're they're a global nexus. So that money comes from all over the world, and they say to Sacramento, we can do whatever we want, and we have the money. The middle class has left. About 10 million people left California the last 40 years. And we know where they went. They went to Nevada, Idaho, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and then we have half of all the undocumented illegal aliens in the country. 27% of Californians were not born in the United States, whether they're legally or residents or citizens. So that was the nexus. Great wealth, great poverty. But the way I look at it is they would not want to hear this, but it's kind of just think of the old Confederacy or the antebellum South. One party, Democratic.
Yes.
This is a one-party state. They had big cotton. We had big tech. Big tech runs the whole state, just like big cotton. And then we had just, in the Old South, we had the plantationist class. These are the people that live in Woodside or the Berkeley Hills or Palo Alto. And then you had everybody else, black slaves, and you had the poor, what they called white trash. There was no middle class in the South. And when I go to Stanford, I see all these wealthy kids there. And then I go along El Camino, everybody's living in a trailer. Or I go over to the Apple or Google or Facebook campuses, and people are living in the streets that work there.
Right.
And then the other thing about the old Confederacy, they were obsessed with race. And it was the one drop of wool. Everybody was trying to figure out when a baby was born what the precise percentage is, and then they were a ranked society. And where I go, when I get my email in the morning, it's all about one thing: race. Race, 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 race. I turn on the television, white privilege, and then we have the same. Can Elizabeth Warren pass as a minority? Can Ward Churchill pass? Can Rachel Dolezal? It's like African Americans in the South pine to pass as white people. And it's just a sick fixation on our superficial appearance. It's very Confederate society, California. It's medieval, feudal. There is no middle class anymore.
All right, begin when you're ready.
The Dying Citizen is the name of the book, How Progressive Elites, Tribalism, and Globalism Are Destroying the Idea of America. And a very provocative subtitle, but let's first talk about the title. What is a citizen?
Yeah, well, a citizen is very rare. Civilization's very old, 7,000 years old, but for nearly the first 4,500 years, there were no citizens. They were slaves or subjects or tribes or residents. But the idea that you would have people who lived in a confined space and they would govern themselves. So they would elect their officials, they would audit them, they would set their budgets, their expenditures, they would decide when to go to war, when to have peace. That was a lot of responsibilities. And most importantly, it seems to have started in the 8th century BC on the principle of inheritance, that you planted olive trees or vines on your small plot, and you owned them, the state didn't own them, and you had the right to pass them on without interference from the state. So like the American Constitution, the protection of property was very important. And that, it wasn't a linear progression to where we are. It was fits and starts, episodic. After the 5th century AD, it disappeared. And it didn't come back really to the Renaissance, Venetian and Florentine republics. And for all the wokeness, it doesn't exist outside the West unless it's been westernized. So China does not have a tradition of citizenship, of an autonomous, independent, resident person that has privileges and responsibilities.
It seems like we lost track of this concept somewhere along the way, and now we speak to Americans as if we're merely residents. And increasingly we are.
Yes. One thing I did in the book is I said to myself, what traditionally across time and space were the exclusive privileges or the domain of citizens? What could they do that residents couldn't do? And I came up with maybe 6 or 7 things, and they're mostly gone. A citizen can vote, a resident can't, but we're already having school boards. where illegal aliens are voting. A citizen is eligible for military service or responsible for it, but not a resident. That's gone. A citizen gets entitlements from the government, a resident doesn't. That's gone. A citizen can go freely across borders because of the possession of citizenship or a passport. That's gone. A resident can come across the southern border without any worries at all. In fact, easier than if you come into LAX without a passport, you're going to be in much more trouble than somebody coming in across the Texas border illegally. All I can think of, the only distinction now between a resident and a citizen is residents now cannot hold office so far, but that's being eroded. The tenet by statute that people here from other countries could not involve themselves in political campaigns, that's gone. And so they've completely blended together. And, in the book I try to explain that there were organic bottom-up forces that destroyed citizenship, and there were top-down elite postmodern as opposed to pre-modern forces that also destroyed it.
Yeah, this is exactly where I wanted to go next, which is, do you see it, was it a design that we now have a society that emphasizes mere residency and not citizenship?
I think what happened was, it wasn't designed from the bottom by intent, but we took no active measures to prevent what were the natural order of things. The natural order of things in the world today and in the past is there's no middle class. It's a small group of wealthy people that control the government, means, to use a Marxist cliche, means of production. And then the vast underclass, serfs, slaves, what have you, poor, subsidized poor. But the idea you're going to have a strong middle class, it'll be bigger than both those classes combined, and they will have muscular and intellectual ability, and they won't be dependent on government, and they won't try to manipulate government. That is, by every measure, as far as middle class income, debt, tuition debt, the age when people marry, the age when people have their first child, the age when people buy a home, all of that is eroded. And then there's another pre-modern, pre-civilizational idea that there's no borders. So you look at Aristotle, all the way from Aristotle to Tocqueville, you have to have a sacred space where you can inculcate values and emphasize customs and traditions that make you a unique body politic. And closely associated is a third force, and that's tribalism. That was the idea. First thing you pick up Thucydides, he says, or Aristotle, before there was civilization, and they call that the polis, city-state, there were tribes. And what they mean is people who picked tribal leaders, or they made generals of their tribe on the basis of blood ties or superficial affinities, like how they look. Or they were always feuding. They could never form a nation state. And so their appearance was essential to who they are. And so it was a retrograde. So Rwanda went retrograde. Yugoslavia went retrograde. We're going retrograde. You can't turn on MSNBC or CNN without someone like Joy Reid or Don Lemon yelling at you, white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy.
Right.
Everything.
Yes.
And then we have this strange phenomenon where you can be here for 3 generations and not speak Spanish. You suddenly, in the year of our Lord, 2021, everybody's trilling their R's, or they're putting accents on their names.
Sure.
Everybody's looking for a cachet. Right. Something that says, I'm not a white male heterosexual Christian. I deserve victim status.
So one of the themes of the book, and the central theme of Breitbart's coverage over the last decade, has been the issue of immigration. And it's not a xenophobic thing. It's a combination, I think, of a couple things, which is, practically speaking, seems to be impossible to have this sort of one world globalism with open borders, which we'll get to throughout the interview. But then there is this concept of American exceptionalism, and that we do have a culture and a set of values that is worth preserving to some degree, that is uniquely American. And I think that's the real idea that's truly under assault at this moment.
Yeah, I think this idea that we're going to be a multiracial constitutional, that is very rare. I mean, look at the places today that are of any extent or magnitude. Maybe India, maybe Brazil, and they don't work. So that took a lot of effort to tell people birds of a feather don't flock together just because you look alike. And we were making great progress. if we had this conversation 3 years ago, minority unemployment had hit a historic low.
Right.
People were getting beyond race. For all of the left saying that Trump is a racist, people were getting on beyond it. But as these forces were unleashed, these natural dark forces of human nature, tribalism, racial exclusivity, a medieval bilateral class of rich and poor, there were these elites. And one of the things that we did, and this was always warned about, was the administrative or permanent state government. These were people who were judge, jury, and executioner, judicial, executive, and legislative class into one agency or to one person. And even, autocratic regimes had said the Kremlin always outlasted the czars, the communists, and it's there today. Versailles outlasted the Bourbons. So we have these people that they're like the high priest of government, and they're not accountable. And just think of the names that have come in and out of the news: Mark Milley, Anthony Fauci, John Brennan, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok. What do they all have in common? They lie under oath like
Sure.
Clapper and Brennan,
Yeah.
or they feign memory lapses like Mueller or Comey, or they say one thing on Monday and then contradict them on Tuesday like Milley and Fauci.
Right.
And when anybody tries to suggest that they've outlived their usefulness, they go crazy and call them names, and then they, as we're talking today in the FBI, if they don't like James O'Keefe, they go after him and they stage a big SWAT raid, march him out in his underwear, and tip off the New York Times. They did the same thing to Roger Stone. The FBI has become a retrieval service for the Biden family.
Right.
Any embarrassing laptop or diary, call up the FBI and go get it for me. I mean, if I lose my laptop or you lose your diary, can you call the FBI? You're a citizen.
No.
And so these are unelectable, powerful people that are completely out of control. And it really came to me when I was writing the book, I had what really got me thinking of writing this was well before wokeness and all this. Because I have an epilogue about all the recent stuff, but James Clapper got on TV and he said the National Security Agency does not spy on Americans, under oath.
Right.
And then when they caught him within hours, he said, I gave the least untruthful answer. The least, what did that mean, the least untruth? And I said to my wife, I said, just think if you said that to the IRS when they called you up. Your income was misreported and you said, I gave the least untruthful answer. He was completely immune from audit or censure.
The focus of my personal research and study for the last couple of years has been on our corporate media. And it is remarkable to watch the John Brennans of the world. And he is someone who is maybe the #1 Russia hoaxer of them all, who went from the United States government to a lucrative job where he used his security clearance to smear a duly elected president, trying to nullify an election and the vote of 70 million Americans or whatever it was in 2016. And he kept getting elevated and promoted for
He
it.
did. And remember the worst thing he did? He got on as a paid consultant, and he and Clapper were sort of twins.
Yes.
And they went on night after night after night. Clapper said that Trump was, quote, I'm quoting verbatim, is a Russian asset. And Brennan said he is treasonous. So they were calling the commander-in-chief while they had subordinates still in these intelligence agencies that they were in daily contact, while they had security clearances. And they'd kind of wink and nod, my sources tell me.
Yeah.
Or the word is that Donald Trump is going to be, remember, bombshell, walls are closing in. And they were the gurus, and that was all made up. I say that because they went under oath to a confidential closed session of the House Intelligence Committee, and that leaked, mostly from the Democratic side. They were asked under oath, could you please tell us your evidence for collusion that would substantiate these charges you're making every night? And they had none. So they were deliberately telling the people in charge that might bring a criminal complaint against them, oh, I'm just funning around. And then the American people, they were very serious. And Comey, 245 times, he can't remember. Robert Mueller can't remember the Steele dossier or Fusion GPS were the pillars of his whole investigation.
I want to return to immigration because it's such an important point, and it's fundamental in the concept of talking about the dying citizen and the concept of a citizenry. It does seem like there are very powerful vested interests that would like America comprised of residents and not citizens, and I think that's why we have such an unfettered immigration system, not just illegal immigration, but the unchecked immigration.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about who those vested interests are, and you talk about
Yeah.
a few of them in the book in particular.
Well, it's very rare that you have an issue that gets 360 degrees support.
Yeah.
And that explains the inexplicable. So we're looking at the border right now,
Yes.
and there's 2 million people have come across in what will be the fiscal year. And you say, this is outrageous. Or you think to yourself, federal employees and U.S. soldiers must get vaccinations, even if they've had COVID,
Right.
and they have antibodies, but 2 million people don't? Are they more privileged than citizens? And their first thing they did was enter the country illegally, and the second thing they did was reside here illegally. So why is that? And the answer is, it's one of those rare alignment of the planets. You've got the right, the Milton Friedman free market people, and say, you know, let the market adjudicate. If they're going to come across, they'll stop when wages go to $2 an hour. And then you've got the corporate interest, and they said, Americans won't do this work. You need cheap labor. And then you've got the La Raza lobby. This was our land, and we were trying to repopulate it. This is payback for the Mexican War. The more that we can identify by Raza, the more it's going to be in our interest, our tribal. Then you got the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is saying, you know, these issues that we've gravitated to, the uncompromising Green New Deal or open borders or critical race theory or this inflationary or debt, it doesn't win. So we're going to change the demography. And then you've got the Mexican government, and they're saying, you know, I'd rather have them go to the United States than march on Mexico City because it's a racist, socially unjust government. And most of the people are coming, remember, these are not the people who came in the 1950s from northern Mexico. They're indigenous people. In fact, people in this area that I talk to, in many cases, their native language is not Spanish. It's an indigenous Mixoteca, Baja, and so they're the poorest of the poor, and they've faced enormous oppression in Mexico. So this is the Frederick Jackson Turner's safety valve theory: go north. And then Mexico thinks, you know, the longer they are north and the longer they're not in Mexico, the more they like Mexico, and they romanticize us, and they become a potent lobbying. We have over 100 consulates, so they're always saying, you know, Mexico's great. They go to a soccer match in LA,
Yes.
They cheer for Mexico.
That's right.
And
it's
so
a home game
Mexico
for Mexico now
loves
in LA.
that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's really ironic is 10, 20, 30, $35 billion for Mexico, 10, 20, then now it's 30 billion for Central America in remittances. That's the largest source of foreign exchange, more than oil for Mexico, than all of those countries combined have ever had. So their governments are looking like this and saying, well, we send these 18-year-old kids, they go up to work in a meatpacking plant, they make $10 an hour, they can't afford to live, the U.S. government gives them Medi-Cal, Medicaid,
Yes.
legal help, housing help, food stamps, and that frees up disposable income, and they send back $200 or $300 a week.
Healthcare from the UCLA medical system.
Yes, $60 billion shot in the arm for Central. So they're for it. And then what do? They're so brilliant. If you build 1 meter of fencing, if you deport one person, the entire nexus comes into power. You're a racist.
Right.
You're an imperialist. You're a neo-colonialist. You can't do it. And they start telling us how to run our own country. And then, you know, you can say anything about the United States and Mexico you want. If the United States says one thing about them, you're a colonialist, you're a racist. We're not the people who are breaking into Mexico's country. Nobody ever says in Mexico, I want to ask myself a question. Why is it with this fertile, beautiful, mineral-rich land do half the people poll they want to leave and go to America when this is a Yankee, racist, European paradigm that we don't like? Well, it doesn't make any sense. You know, I have all of these I had students that were mostly Mexican American. One day I walked out, and during the Prop 187, I said to one of my students, I said, Juan, you're waving the flag of the country you do not want to go back to, and they just burned the flag of the country under no circumstances you want to leave. Do you ever think about the logical consistency of that? And he just looked at me and he said, well, I'm angry. So I said, who are you angry about? The country you decided to leave and enter here illegally, and the country that welcomed you, and now you're here as an illegal resident with no punishment, and you're burning that flag? Now, why is that? So it's incoherent. It really is. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's by design.
I think it's quite coherent, and I think that one of the things that we're witnessing is those who want unfettered immigration, including illegal immigration, but not just illegal immigration. Those people they are watering down the economic power of the citizens, particularly blue collar and middle class citizens. The elite are untouchable at this point in this country, and the poor benefit from these policies in a lot of ways as well because of sort of nanny state, welfare state type programs. So I wanted you to flesh out this concept for me, that the economic power of the citizen is getting damaged.
And you can see that as recent as 2000, the demography of the United States was about 2.1. It's about 1.7. That's always a barometer when people decide to shrink. And so in the book, I looked at my family, and I looked at 3 of us and how many children did we have the replacement. We didn't. And I looked at other families, my relatives. So when a society decides to shrink, it says, I have no confidence in the future. So people are getting married later, they're having fewer children, they're having children later. And that's because they're being crushed by student debt, they're getting crushed by the cost of a home, they're getting crushed by a status in real middle class wages. And I guess and then culturally, you notice it wasn't just, the excuse was that Trump was the person that brought out all of the racism, so they used these epithets for Trumpers. But it really was a hatred of the middle class.
Yes.
Obama started it before Trump existed. You want to stop just for a second?
No, it's good.
Oh, yeah. So
you're welcome.
Yeah.
This will be people's favorite part of the whole video, I guarantee you. It won't be anything smart either of us say. It'll be when the dogs came in.
But it was clingers with Obama.
Right.
And then Hillary added to the repertoire and irredeemables. Yes. And then Biden called them chumps. And I think he also said they were the dregs of society. And I think McCain called them Trump brought out all the crazies. And so the middle class has always lacked the culture of the wealthy and the romance of the poor. So they're always sort of who are the middle class? Boy, every once in a while somebody who is solidly middle class appears into the political matrix. And if it's Sarah Palin, remember her?
Yeah, of course.
They hated her.
Yes.
She was the person who burned fossil fuels on snowmobiles and jet skis, and she liked America and upward mobility. They just hated her. She had no taste in clothes. She doesn't read Vogue. And then the other side, she's not poor little, she's not a person of color.
Right.
So she lost both ways. And Trump, even though he was a billionaire, he just fit central casting perfectly.
Are borders racist?
Borders?
Yes.
No, they're not at all, because they're not at all. Only in the sense that the people coming in feel that they must feel they have an entitlement, or that the people who are in the United States don't have a legal right to their land, and they feel that they have some innate right. And I say that because if you look very carefully at the Mexican Constitution, they have a perennial fight about getting some of the language out about the racial essence or the purity of that immigration shall not change or alter what Mexico is. And as someone who's lived my entire life in a predominantly Mexican American and Mexican national community, and who has been to Mexico, I will guarantee you that most of the racial slurs that I've heard in my life have come from people of that ancestry, because it's deep, and I don't mean all Mexicans. I'm saying it was always directed at darker Mexicans. So if I was 2 miles away there,
Wow.
I heard one person being called chocolate.
Wow.
And I'll name other names in Spanish, but it was all based on your skin color. That was not coming from white people. I know that the left says, well, they inherited it from white people, or it was osmosis. No, it was innate in Mexican society. I can remember this wall right here. I worked for 1 year with a very hard-working, wonderful person, and he said to me once, I won't mention his name, he said, I got to quit because I'm wearing long sleeve shirts. It was about 101. I said, why are you going to do that? And he said, because everybody's going to call me a blank, blank, blank if I get too sunburned,
Wow.
too tan. So I've got to wear a long sleeve shirt. So yeah, I think they were racially obsessed.
If you were to only consume establishment American media, you would think America is particularly hostile towards racial and ethnic minorities and immigrants. Is that the truth?
Yeah. Well, when you ask yourself, who is behind this new racial wokeness and separation, I don't see it in American middle-class popular culture. By that I mean, if we were to drive in and have lunch at Sal's or one of these restaurants in Selma, even though the population is 85, we would see people that were intermarried and nobody knows it, nobody cares. There's nobody saying that white person did that. That comes from universities and the media, the foundations, the elites, and who are governing those elites? It's mostly very wealthy white people. And I have this theory, it's no more than a theory, that very affluent so-called white people are very insecure about their ability to get along with people. They have such emphasis on K through 12, academic excellence, 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 go to the top marquee universities, go to this job, this law firm, that they don't get out with the people, and they feel guilty about it. So they don't want to. When I'm in Palo Alto, where I see these people in Atherton, Hillsborough, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Stanford University, I don't see a lot of very wealthy white people that are behind wokeness, and they're all woke. They write memos to us in the Stanford faculty and senior fellows, but I don't see their kids in the public school.
Yes.
I don't see them hanging out with John Garcia and the PTA meetings. When I go to restaurants, I don't see them associating with poor people. They don't use, it used to be race, class, and gender. Well, there's no class anymore. They don't say race, class, they say diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's basically a synonym for race. So what I'm getting at is I have a feeling they don't feel comfortable with people of different classes and races, so they create this facade. It's kind of like, the more in the abstract that I damn the deplorables and those awful white middle-class people in Youngstown, Ohio, the better I feel in Atherton that I don't have to talk to my nanny other than at work, or I can give my used car to my gardener. I feel really good, but I do not want to be around those people. That's how they sound.
This is what's striking to me where I'm from in Los Angeles, where there's so much effort that's made from wealthy families, typically white families, typically liberal woke families, to get their kids into the most exclusive private schools there is, not inclusive, exclusive.
Including, remember, bribery from celebrities in Los Angeles.
And bribery from the celebrity class. And then they vote for people who empower the teachers' unions that have ruined the public schools for the rest of us, which are, of course, much more diverse. So they're actually ruining the schools for brown people as well.
So I got a call maybe 30 times over, and it went like this, from 30 different people. And the call went like this. My son applied to fill in the blanks, the best schools in the university.
Yeah.
And he had a perfect GPA, or more than a perfect, 4.4. He had perfect ACT or SAT. He was the captain of the football team. He was the debate. And his sibling got in, or his cousin, but he didn't get in.
Yeah.
What is going on? And I'll say, you tell me what's going on. Well, we made investigations. I said, what did you find? Well, and they were very reluctant to tell me, but you know, it used to be disproportionately impacted or proportional representation, disparate impact. In other words, we were going to have a racial spoil system that nobody would admit to, but if you were a white male, you made up 30% of the population. So you got in 30%, and that was mostly only the elite who could get in there and compete at that level. This year, i.e. 2021 incoming class, you get the impression that that's in half. It's about 14 or 15%. Right. And what's interesting about it is, if you take out athletes and you take out alumni legacies and donors, and you look at what's left of those scraps, 8 or 9%, then you've got these upper middle class families that are furious and they're irate that they played by all the rules, right, but because of their race, their children did not get in, and yet these liberal institutions are giving special considerations for people who give $8, $10, $12 million a year. Amazing. And they know that, and they will not talk about it. And it's the most class repressive and racially segregated system. And you know, I was thinking the other day, if you just said, is California the blue state model sort of the legacy of the old Confederacy? And you thought, maybe in 1865, if you got everybody around after the Civil War, you said, you know, in 156 years, where will people be obsessed with race? Where will there be a one-party system? Where will there be a two-by wealthy, poor, feudal society? Yeah. They would have said, here in the South, and the industrial North or the wide open West is where opportunity, and it was. And now what's happened is people are leaving in droves the blue states because right, it's wealthy and poor like the old South. It's got a monopoly in California. Tech is like big cotton. It's one, and then it's a one-party state. There's only the Democratic Party in these blue states, and they're racially obsessed.
So California wants to give reparations for slavery. So Professor Hanson, you're arguably America's most important historian. Could you refresh my recollection on whether California was a free state or a slave state?
California was a free state, and it was not only a free state. There were elements because of its climate, and people from the South came along and they thought they would make inroads. And I can tell you the history of this family farming, they had zero resonance. And it was always a union state, and it was an industrial state. It had the Big Four, it had the railroads. It was never a part of the South. And if you look at a map of the United States, when you look at Southern California, it's on latitude, it is a southern state, but it wasn't a southern state, and there were never slaves here. And another big myth about California is that we stole it. When you look at the demography of 1850, the thing that people couldn't figure out about California was its demography per square mile was very small. Partly it was because of water, but it was a very isolated country, so the number of people who right now are indigenous people go back are very small in California. The number of people who say, when I was a professor and I wrote Mexifornia, I got protest a lot, and one group came in and said, the borders crossed us, we didn't cross the borders. So I just asked the protesters, would you please tell me when your ancestors were in California? I want to know. And I want to know what the population of California was in 1850. It was about 25,000 people of, now 40 million. So this idea that people who are not white were indigenous people there's almost nobody here. They came later, like everybody else. They had no particular claim on the land. They weren't even here. And if you want to even get more blunt about it, there were Native American peoples that were fighting, and then they were conquered by the Spanish, who then were conquered by the Mexicans, who took it from the Spanish, and then they were conquered by the Americans, who took it from the Mexicans. But the actual demography, it was more or less an empty state. And when it started to get populated, it was during the gold rush, sure, the railroad. And even then, it was a very ethnically diverse state. I mean, there were people from but it was an American state, so right, people poured in here. And this house right there, my great-great-grandmother came from northern Missouri, and one of the reasons she came here and her family was they were Northerners. And after the war, there was a lot of get even with the South, get even with the North, and the Transcontinental Railroad had just been built, and they took a ticket. All of them came to San Francisco, then they got wagons and came out here. Land was $4 an acre from the railroad.
There is a war, I think, on America's origin story, and they're trying to portray America as being conceived basically by evil people, of evil means. Before we get into what that war looks like and why it matters, I want to talk a little bit about who's behind it, because you're deeply in academia. You've been a teacher, professor, a fellow now at the Hoover Institution. You teach at Hillsdale. You've been involved in academia for your whole adult life, many decades. It feels like it comes from academia. I noticed for me, while I was coming up through school, America was taught to me as basically a neutral place, not particularly special, but not necessarily worse than other countries. Now it does seem like we're being taught that America is particularly bad, and it's happening pretty quickly, and culturally it's a phenomenon.
Well, most bad ideas come from intellectuals in general, and in the university in particular, and mostly from the upper middle class. So if you keep that in mind, the more people get privilege and the more they get upwardly mobile and wealthy. And I'm talking about the university now. I mean, we're not teaching 5 classes. When I started in '84, we were teaching 5 a semester as a lecturer, 10. We made $32,000. Now it's become sort of a very lucrative thing. It's 8 or 9 months a year, summers off, 30 weeks a year of actual work, lifetime employment after 6 years. It's very discriminatory against part-time teachers. I mean, they are exploited. They have about 48% of the units nationwide. They get about half the pay. That said, the people who are doing this are wealthy, tenured people of all different colors, races, and they're a priesthood. And they're very angry people. The more that they're successful, the angrier they get, because they always say, you know, I have a PhD, I'm brilliant, but I don't make as much as the developer, or that guy has 7-Elevens, he's an idiot and he makes more money. This country does not reward sensitivity and art and humanities and peace and beauty like me, and it's rotten. And then you look at their lives. You know, I used to go over to these academics' homes, and wood floors, always the same. Kind of tasteful wood floors, tasteful neighborhood, tasteful, but very expensive. And I thought, well, you hate capitalism, bourgeoisie life, but you're so bourgeois. Where did you? And then they would talk to you. And they'd say, Victor, where's your kids going to go? I said, I don't know. If they want to go to, I have one son that wants to go to Fresno State, one wants to go to UC Santa Cruz. More power to them. Well, I just want to tell you that Bunny's going to Yale, and someone's going to Stanford, and we'll be going up there this weekend. And then it was, where did you go this weekend? Where did you go this summer? And the more they talk to you, it's the more that they talk to you, it was always places like what? Rural France, Provence, Florence, right. Venice. So they all had these very elite tastes, and they were never, ever subject to the consequences of their own ideology. So let's get rid of water transference, but not Hetch in the Bay Area. Let's get 27 cents a kilowatt energy, but let's live in 65-degree weather year-round.
So what is, do you think, motivating these attacks on America right now, coming from the academy and into the establishment media? It seems like we do the best job of any country protecting the individual. We have a culture of self-criticism, which you write about in the book, which is something that's wonderful. We seem to be leading the world in terms of arts and culture still, despite the fact that I think we're kind of moving into a mediocre age in that regard. Why is it so bad here? Why do people?
Well, they've always been a quality of result people. And they want a bigger government and more government employees to make sure that on the back end we end up equal. If we're all going to be poorer but more equal, that's far better than all of us being better off but having some. They've always been that way. They've never been successful. California, the United States, these are upwardly mobile societies. Okay. Then they brought in this bankrupt European idea of critical theory, critical legal theory, critical race theory. And it was basically an attack on the establishment that said that all the rules were socially constructed for the protection of what originally was Marxist idea of elites, oppressive insects that sucked out the blood of the proletariat. Okay, and then that didn't work. And then Obama came in. He was very brilliant. People didn't give him credit. They came up with this idea that, well, you know, race is the real thing.
Yeah.
Because if it's not the real thing, we're in trouble. Because if you look at upward mobility among Latinos and Asians and African Americans, it's going up. And we're going to lose.
So that means you can't focus on class.
Exactly. So they thought, we're going to lose the victim vote. It's not going to be a victim vote. And there's 17 ethnic minorities that make per capita more than so-called white people, you know, Punjabis, Korean. So they came up with the idea of diversity, and they said, doesn't matter. If you are non-white, you are diverse, and therefore, no matter what your income, you're oppressed. And suddenly, I would have neighbors that were from the Punjab. I had neighbors that were from Spain. I knew people from Argentina. They're all very affluent, and they were minorities.
But isn't it somewhat absurd that the highest concentration of impoverished Americans are still white people? Maybe not.
Well, in sheer numbers.
In sheer numbers.
Absolutely.
So, but isn't it sort of absurd that the implication that those people are somehow oppressing Oprah Winfrey and Michelle Obama?
It was absurd, but you see, in their logic, it was just a perfect matrix, a perfect paradigm for them. For they said, first of all, anybody who could be wealthy was forever a victim, because unlike class, if your new home burned down or your tech job evaporated, you could go down in class and be exploited. But not if you're Oprah, not if you're Meghan Markle, not if you're LeBron, not if you're the Obamas. You are always oppressed, and therefore you're not 12% of the population. You're 30%, and we're going to have it was the bankrupt idea of Jesse Jackson's crazy rainbow theory, but energized with critical race theory. And race is immutable. And so we're now with this 30-70, and then we needed the oppressor. And the wealthy white class said, you know what? This is really good, because we used to be oppressive because we had all the money and the elite, and we were oppressing, in Marxist terms, the lower but now we're going to ally ourselves with people of color because there is a common enemy, and it's white trash. It's white workers. It's deplorables. They have no culture, no taste. We never liked them. We went up into the attic. We closed the door. We don't want them to come up after us. And these people are horrible. And that's why in this whole diversity era, all of a sudden certain people, we mentioned Sarah Palin, but Donald Trump was another, that Queen's accent. Certain people thought, well, we don't like those people.
They're the real threat.
Look at those rallies. Remember the CNN reporter who said, I have more teeth than everybody in this Trump rally put together.
Wow.
And remember Stroke and Page? And
of course.
And they said they could smell
Walmart people.
They could smell them.
Unbelievable.
And they really, and Obama, you know, they cling to their religion. And I'm thinking, when I read that, Obama said, well, I lost Pennsylvania because the clingers cling to their guns and religion. I said, and what do you? I wrote it something. And what do you cling to? Reverend Wright's church?
Yeah. A
pseudo nutty cult that said that Israel had weapons that could smell or ferret out Arabs by their race. He had all these conspiracy, anti-Semitic theories, you remember? And then he gets up in front of the whole congregation and he says, God damn America. And the whole congregation, people forget that, get up and give him a standing ovation.
Yeah, that was
and this is the church that Barack Obama goes to, and his children are baptized, where he gets married. And then he says to these other people, they cling to their religion. And it was very racist of him to say that.
So in this moment, when we're seeing the Biden inflation and we're seeing the gas prices the way they are, and we're seeing Biden's foreign policy fail around the world, that China's not being held accountable for the coronavirus, and Republicans are winning elections in unexpected places, there's a lot of kind of good news for people on the right immediately. But what I'm most scared about is the indoctrination and the fact that people my age and younger are being more exposed to critical race theory than not even just the founding documents and the founding fathers, the great philosophers, the Enlightenment thinkers. And this is something that you have a good perspective on. I think it does come up in the book. This is something that is going to have lasting implications. And so maybe you could speak to the parents in the audience who need to navigate academia. They need to navigate a school system that's increasingly teaching these theories that are very divisive versus the classics.
They need to know that not all, but most universities, at least in the social sciences and the humanities, but it's creeping into the hard sciences, that there's 3 lessons to learn from it. Number 1, it's not inductive. They don't teach you how to reason and give you facts and examples from literature or history. They are deductive. They say, this country is racist, this country started in 1619, whatever it is, and we're going to lead you to that premise. So it's deductive. Second, by being deductive and focusing on trivia like race or inclusion, all this stuff, they are not teaching people. I could tell in my own small field that the number of scholars who could read Greek or Latin was very small. In fact, they abolished the requirement at Princeton University. They had to. So they were not being very educated. And third, if you look at the rate of tuition increases and you compare it to the rate of inflation, the universities, because of the issue of moral hazard and the federal government assumed that, they were charging more and people were going into debt, 1.7 trillion. You add all that together and these students were emerging and they were arrogant because they thought that their professors were right. They knew who was evil and who wasn't. They were ignorant because they had no ability to defend those positions, and they were poor. I just described sort of the background of the typical Antifa protester. He's arrogant, he's ignorant, and he's poor. And poor in the sense that he's indebted. And when you looked at remedies and you tried to tell the university remedies, and I thought I would get so much hate mail, I'd say, well, why don't we just be more egalitarian? Why don't we just say this? Just as you require SAT and ACT to get into the university, or at least they used to, why don't we have an exit exam? That everybody who gets a BA has a common body of knowledge. You had to get, say, 550 on the SAT when you leave. Or you won't get your BA.
Right.
And then they'd have to study.
Right.
And they say, oh, I can't do that. And then you'd say, well, instead of you don't have to get a credential to teach a JC or a university. Why don't we give people a choice? You want to go teach 8th grade? Get a master's for 1 year in a real academic.
But won't that show students are going backwards in a lot of cases?
They are. I think they learn less when they come out than they know.
Yes.
I know they do, because I've seen them and I have talked to them and I've taught them. And then why not say to them, we could equally say, why don't we tell faculty you can have 5-year contract? Just tell me what you're going to do for 5 years. You're going to teach this many classes, this minimum teaching evaluations to the degree that matters, this many articles, but we're not going to give you lifetime employment.
Yeah.
And they're outraged. Or then if you say, why don't we just limit the number of part-time units to 20%?
Yeah.
So we don't exploit poor people? They get angry. If you say to them, why don't we tax the endowment since you're so political? You've got, I think Stanford's got, I don't know what it is, $27 billion, Harvard $60 billion. They got these enormous incomes and they're pushing these social critical theories. Why don't you just say, you can do that, but you're partisan and you've got to pay taxes on the endowment income. And any just egalitarian suggestion in these very elite, quote unquote, oppressed critical race theory, whatever we want to call these people, they get angry. And you know what's funny about it is they all talk about race. But when you go into university, race among that class, it's kind of a fight among elites. It's should the new dean of diversity, inclusion, equity, or whatever, should he have a higher ranking than the provost? Should Don Lemon or Joy Reid get the primetime slot?
Yeah.
Should this many people of color be in these commercials?
Yeah.
It's never, why don't we go into the inner city of Chicago and start having private academies to give people the skills to get out of it? Why can't we ensure there's not murder on the streets in Baltimore? Why can't we work together and tutor young kids in Stockton? Never. It's It's all about the elite and how they fight and bicker with one each other on the basis of race and gender.
You have a lot of colleagues who I'm sure you speak to who are not of your worldview politically or my worldview politically. How do they feel that things are going with the academy? Because it does seem like
You mean people on the left?
people on the left. Yeah, do they? Because
Publicly or privately?
I'm more curious about privately, because publicly they know that to speak out at this point would threaten their job, or at least threaten public harassment. But
Well, I get two reactions, and one is the email. I call it the email, and that's from a professor. And sometimes it's signed, and sometimes it's unsigned, and says, "I'm a lifelong liberal, but this happened to me," and it's usually something like, "I told students to salute the flag," or something. You know what I mean? I'm being facetious, but it's something like, I ask people to read, Kill a Mockingbird or something, and they got canceled. And what do you think of this? And don't use my name, but it's very timid, and they're angry, and can you give me, and you write a little note back and say, I sympathize with you. And then there's the private conversation, and it goes something like this. I've had about 7 of them this year. Well, people are very racially sensitized, and because the system rewards traditional race-based skills like inductive method and prior literary historical knowledge, a large vocabulary, my people of color students, according to the system that I work within, are not doing as well necessarily as the Asian students or the white students in most cases, and therefore there might be a pattern that I'm giving lower grades. I'm very worried about this, but I'm most worried that the charge of racism might stick to me this coming school year, because the number of people who have been oppressed and marginalized and treated terribly but do not meet the traditional requirements in terms of grades and test scores is now at an all-time high. End of argument. What am I going to do? I'm not a racist, but if I have to give, 50% of my class C's and D's, and yet that might, could, should possibly suggest a pattern based on race or ethnic background. So yeah, they're worried. And they all know that their students. One person, a Stanford professor, told me at a dinner, "I am terrified. This is the French Revolution. These are Robespierre and the Jacobins, and they're going to guillotine us.
Yes.
Because we are counterfeit revolutionaries, and they're scared of their own student."
In the book, The Dying Citizen, it is very much connecting historical information to the contemporary landscape that we're in culturally and politically. But a couple of things that really jumped out at me historically. You point out that we continue to get punished because our founders were white men. We didn't really have a lot of other options then, did we? I mean, what were the options for our founders?
No, it's very funny, and that is that...
I mean, what was the breakdown of America at the time?
Well, it was about 94% of the people who were quote unquote free was 94%, and there was about 8% African American in time, and they were mostly, not all, but mostly confined to the southern states. Okay, so as I always ask people, what nation that was founded, unfortunately, there was always a dominant party, but what nation in which the dominant party, racially or ethnically or nationally, created a system whose inherent logic would replace them, in a sense, by dilute their own power? Because once you have something called the Declaration of Independence, and you say all men are created equal, and once you welcome people in and you redefine American citizenship not as blood and soil, but as somebody who adheres to the Constitution, it was inevitable that the small little British and Scottish Protestants would let in the Scots-Irish
Right.
And then they would let in the Catholics, and then they would go to the Germans, and then they would go to the Eastern Europeans, and then they would go to the Jews, and then the Asians, then the Latinos, and then the African population as well. And they would always, it would get bigger and bigger, and it would be less power because it would be diluted for the supposed racists. But they created the system that put themselves out of business.
So our founders create this system of self-criticism, and now we're today where the left constantly criticizes our founders and doesn't understand that it's only in that system that they have that ability to freely do it.
Or it's even worse. Remember what Martin Luther King Jr.'s, I went to Grace Cathedral when I was 12 years old. My mom pushed me in the door with it. It was sold out, San Francisco. And I remember what he said. He said, I'm not forcing people. First of all, he said, be the best you are. If you're a janitor, you're a gardener, be the best. The second thing I remember him saying was, I'm not telling white people that they have to adopt my creed. I'm telling them that your creed is the one that I like, and I want you to live up to your own Declaration and Constitution. I didn't say all people were created equal. I agree with it. You did. You created the Constitution. You didn't mention black people. I know the 3/5 clause, and of course that's distorted, but that was a a northern effort to say to the South, you're not going to have it both ways. You're not going to enslave people, and then all of a sudden say they're full citizens for the purposes of the census, so you get more in the House. So that was the North didn't want.
But this is a very important history that I've been obsessed with for a long time. But this is the South wanted blacks to be considered a full person, but just one that can't vote.
Or worse, we want them to be full people for purposes of House seats, so we can have more power to impress them.
Yes.
And then the union said, we're not going to give you any credit. And they said, oh, you don't like blacks then? You think they're non-citizens? And they said, don't play that game with me. So they sat down, and people basically said, we just fought the British Empire. We're this fragmented little country, and now we got to go to war over slavery. So we're going to compromise. And then all of a sudden now it's been misused. So the point King was making was, though, that so-called white people created the idea of all people were created equal, and then some of the white people in the South particularly didn't live up to it. And he was saying live up to it. So then when people started living up to it, and it was the most unique system in the world, now they're blamed for what? Creating it? And then what gets all of us in America is when you hear Hannah Jones, the architect of 1619 Project, or you hear LeBron James, or you hear Professor Kendi, you always say, well, I want to know what the alternative is.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. So what do we want to do? We want the class system of Europe? Why don't we have the history of China and racial exclusivity? Do you want the czar system in Russia? Well, you say, well, Africa was ruined by colonization. Let's find indigenous paradigms in South America, and let's follow them. Let's go back and have Native American. Where's Native American democracy? I'm not being chauvinistic. I'm just saying that it's easy to say this is not good because it's not perfect, but I can show you an alternative that is superior. So when you have 1.5 million people, the largest number of immigrants in the world coming to the United States, and they're not intellectuals, and they don't have PhDs, you want to know what they know that PhDs don't.
Yeah.
And so they vote with their feet.
So you mentioned Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's the 1619 Project creator, and she won a Pulitzer Prize for this, unsurprisingly. And one historical factoid you mentioned in the book, which is really powerful, is that a lot of Confederates were upset that the nation was not founded on white supremacy. So I want to know, do you think the Pulitzer Board knows that they know
it? Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, at the formation of the Confederacy, as I recall, said one of the reasons that we broke away was the Constitution was flawed because there was not one word in the Constitution about black slaves. The word Negro is not mentioned.
This is the greatest secret in America right now.
And he said, we're not going to make that mistake. We're going to make sure that the Confederate Constitution privileges white people. And so you you look at that, and then she says it was always a racist society, and it started with this. She knows it's not. She's even said now that it was metaphorical, not to the extent that she wants to give her prize back, because it was given for her literal.
Yes.
But it's, in a larger sense, and
it's framed as a work of journalism, not as fiction.
It is, and every totalitarian movement has to start with Trotskyizing people. They have to get a new foundation date. Nazi Germany, 1932-3 was year zero. I can remember in classics reading I was looking at something at Messenia and the Helots, and there was this little pamphlet that said year one, the year one of the Third Reich. And remember that the French Revolution, they had to rename the days of the months of the year, the days of the week. They had a new deity, supreme reason, ratio. And they had a new foundation date. We're knocking down statues. We're like the the iconoclast that attacked the church imagery. So rename places, tear down statues, get a new foundational date. That's very totalitarian. And that's what these people are. They're totalitarian. They do not believe in free speech or dissent or free expression. They hate the Constitution. They do because they're losing, and they want to change the system.
One of the centerpieces of the book, The Dying Citizen, is globalism, and this has been a constant conversation. It was considered a swear word probably 6 or 8 years ago, like it was some sort of a smear. I think now people are understanding it. They're understanding the concept. And what is the goal of the globalists? Is it to dilute the concept of America or just the nation state in general? Is it to destroy America? Or what are the globalists really about?
Globalists are Westerners. Remember that. They're all Westerners. Or they're westernized, and they're very elite. I'm talking about Klaus Schwab and the Davos set, the Great Reset, the UN Commissioner. In the United States in particular, it was the bi-coastal elite who made out like bandits under an 8 billion new market of consumers. These were media, the entertainment, athletes, law, academics, not guys that could be outsourced, not these little farmers around here that suddenly found the price of grapes go down because they were bringing them in from Chile, or not the lathe worker, or not the welder, or not, the lumberjack when they were bringing in cheap lumber. So it was an elite, and they said, we are so wealthy, and these guys didn't learn coding. They didn't learn how to code. They didn't send their kid to Stanford. They're losers.
Right.
And then they made the next step and said, well, since we're so rich, it was because we're so good, and these people are so poor because they're so bad. They take opiates, and they drove the jobs out because they were, gap-toothed opiate people. So what happened was it destroyed the unity of the United States, and we created two classes, and the bi-coastal people became fabulously wealthy, and they confused that with their own morality. And the people in the interior who had skills that were very important, we go in this kitchen right here and we're going to like that counter. We want that refrigerator. Somebody made it. Just as important as teaching Latin or Greek, or more important. Somebody out here can get those almonds off the tree into your almond butter, your almond soap, your almond oil, your candy bar. And somehow he's as important, we should remember that, as we are. But that's not what the left said, ironically. And so that was what globalization was. It was the reward of the winners. And then they said, well, the next step is, just as we harmonize the world economy, now the culture is harmonized. And we can do it in a way the League of Nations or the progressive movement or the old Greek idea of cosmopolitanism, citizens of the cosmos, they didn't have technology. We have cell phones, we have dish TV, we have the internet. We're a global village. I go to Greece, I go to Italy, I go to Africa. They have t-shirts, they wear University of California sweatshirts. We're all one. Then they said, step 3, and therefore we're going to have a world government. And we're going to get a bunch of, and Klaus Schwab said that, and John Kerry basically says that, and Al Gore says that, and Obama said he was a citizen of the world. And what they meant was that the elite will get together like platonic guardians, and they'll say, you all have your deplorables, and they don't know anything about diversity and equity and inclusion. They have this new idea of capitalism, that it's shareholder capitalism or stakeholder capitalism.
Stakeholder capitalism, that's right.
And they have this idea of a climate change agenda. And they can't get it through a democratic system. So
Right.
they want to, from the top down, by fiat. And COVID was just beautiful. That's why Klaus Schwab wrote a book, COVID-19 and the Great Reset. They loved it. So we're going to use this emergency, this never let a crisis go to waste, and we're going to push down this elite agenda. And they had a couple of problems with it. I should say one problem, and that was called 1.4 billion people in China, because China was a polluter. China was racist. China had people in work camps. China harvested organs, and they said, "Uh-oh, we're all getting rich with China. The NFL is China. Wall Street is China. Corporate board is China. Hollywood is China. Let's give them an exemption."
Yes.
And so we're going to exempt them. And we don't want to hear Dr. Fauci, he may have given $600,000 to the Virology 4 lab, or Mark Milley may call his Chinese counterpart, but let's just give them a pass.
But why do modern liberals love China so much?
A couple of reasons. First of all, the corollary to that question is, why, when you go into a theater, to the degree any of us ever do, we don't, but if you were to go into a new Hollywood movie and you looked at the enemy, have you also noticed that the bad guy in all these corporate psychodramas is a Russian oligarch?
Yeah,
he has an
always.
accent.
Always.
He has some kind of weird Orthodox tattoo,
Huh.
shaved head,
Yeah.
and he has a mafia group. And first of all, Chinese were not white. So Russia was easy to demonize. So a Russian under every bed he was just an extension of Donald Trump, same race, etc. And then every time we said China was cheating, China was racist, China was a birthplace, what did they say? There are 330,000 students. I mean, think of it. They said we were racist. They just channeled every woke
Yes.
platitude. And then you think, well, I got called by a Chinese official once. You're writing incorrect things.
Yes.
And I said, well, your country is racist. It's not fair. You're hurting marginalized people like the Chinese. So I said, well, if we're so racist, why are the children of the party elite, 330,000 strong, coming to the most racist country in the world? And he just said, well, that's a whole different question, and I can have that answer with you off the record. But he was basically telling me, you're the least racist country.
But this is an amazing thing that you identify in the book, and you describe it very well, that they portray America as a uniquely racist place. They basically parrot the BLM talking points. I want to get your take on whether or not they actually believe them. I think the
No,
answer is
they wouldn't send
no.
their kids here if they did.
What's amazing, though, is China literally has systemic racism.
Yes.
We can't stop talking about whether or not in America we have it and to what extent it is, which is probably not very much, if at all. But in China, they have it, and they're trying to systematize it more.
The first day of the lockdown, for about 24 hours before people in the media thought China's not going to like this, so we're going to quit, they started reporting that African students and visitors in Beijing and in Shanghai and places were being rounded up as suspect of spreading COVID and not being allowed to go into McDonald's and things. Imagine that.
Yeah, no, they're literally banned black people from restaurants.
Yeah, they did.
They did in the modern day.
They do. And you talk to black people in Africa, and I've talked to a lot of them, and they say when the Chinese come in, they're not like the American corporate people that want to hang out, and they have their enclaves. They're completely separated. They treat them like dirt. They're a racist, uniracial, even though they have a lot of races and varieties, it's the Han Chinese norm. But they're brilliant. They're so much more sophisticated than the Soviet propagandas.
Yeah.
They just go into this diversity, inclusion, and I've had my problems with Stanford University, obviously, because this conversation would not go down well with them. But as I wrote once to the Stanford Daily, look at what Stanford University, they had a person working as a visiting professor, I think it was in neuroscience, who was a member of the Chinese, connected to the Chinese military. They, according to the Department of Education, did not report $50 to $60 million in gifts from Chinese-related companies that were being funneled into the university. And I'm not trying to single them out as, that was just normal.
Yeah.
That's the NBA. The NBA doesn't care about this market.
So this is where your book, The Dying Citizen, I'll give the incredible subtitle as well, how the progressive elites, tribalism, and globalism are destroying the idea of America. Compliments to the headline title writer. The book is written the way you speak. It's sober-minded, it's well-researched, it's based on data and empirical thinking. There's only a couple of places where I felt angry reading it. One of them is about the NBA, and you talk about how the NBA, their kowtowing, their obsequiousness to China is so offensive, that section of the book. Could you expand on it, talk about LeBron, Nike, Steve Kerr? These are some of the players.
Yeah, I mean, they basically went like this. Somebody in the NBA from Texas, a general manager, said that, complained about Tibet and the way that China treats people, and Hong Kong. And then they all went like this and said, 330 million people in the United States, 1.4 billion in China. We have franchising. We're creating an NBA in China that's 10 times bigger than the one here. We have these shoe companies. LeBron, over the lifetime of his shoe contract, will probably make $1 billion on it. And it's predicated on using his name to sell shoes in China. And so they looked at this and they said, given the fact that we've never really been interested in politics, and if you read what Steve Kerr wrote, or said, he said people are shooting everybody up, and I quote the statistics.
Yes.
He knew nothing what he was talking about. It didn't matter. He was performance.
He equates a couple hundred deaths from mass shootings, which are all appalling, and we all hate them, to tens of millions.
I know. He was performance
systematic
art,
executions.
Virtue signaling, not for us, but for his Chinese paymasters. And he was basically saying, there is so much money here, and we have so offended the American audience. If you look at by any metric, NBA viewership down, actual NBA sport attendance down, endorsement income down. People do not want to be told by a bunch of pampered athletes that they're racist and illiberal and see their flag and their customs. And I'm not talking about white people, I'm talking about everybody. And then in addition to that, they're saying, well, so let me get this straight. You're saying that this is a racist country and it should be proportional representative, and you've had it rough, but this is the most lucrative profession really in all of sports, and it's 75% African American. Why don't we have Asian American and Latino American affirmative action players?
Yeah.
And they say, well, it's based on merit. And you say, exactly. Why don't we do that everywhere?
But this is crucial to the theme that China is also racist, because they don't like what percentage of the NBA is black, and no one in the NBA talks about this aside from Ennis Cantor was one person.
You remember Hollywood? I mentioned in the book they had an informal agreement with some Chinese production countries not to have darker skinned actors because the Chinese market wouldn't tolerate it.
And they all roll over.
Of course they did. LeBron James and all of these people are not interested in racial justice. They're interested in living in the nicest homes with the most security guards and feeling terribly guilty about it by fobbing off their insecurities on other people and calling them racist.
On social media.
Yes. The irony is, though, they know the corporate model about China. And you talk to any corporatist,
yes,
and they will tell you, I went over there 15 years ago. I went over there 10 years ago. I went over there 20 years ago. I showed them this product. We had a joint venture. And once they mastered it, they ended up in a Chinese court losing everything.
Wow.
And so what China is doing very carefully and insidiously, they are looking at the culture of the NBA. They're looking at the franchising model. They're looking at the sport. They're using a little Chinese discipline to it. As we know, they're a little rough in their training methods. They push people and hit them and stuff, or so we're told. But my point is that the NBA has no idea that at some golden moment, the Chinese are going to say to them, see ya, wouldn't want to be ya, get out of here. We can't learn anything from you anymore. We don't need you.
So I want to turn to the coronavirus and all of the themes that coronavirus confirmed in the book, that are themes that were within the book, and you were probably writing them before the coronavirus even happened. I'll read a few of them that I jotted down while I was reading. Cynical profiteering when it comes to China, failure of globalism with the World Health Organization, and big corporations are thriving. This is just the exact scenario you were mapping out in the first three quarters of the book.
When I was almost done with the book, the coronavirus, and I said to myself, I went into town and I talked to a guy who had a little florist shop, and he said something to me. He said, I'm going to be shut down, but you have to go to Walmart to get yours. And then I thought, the shoe guy shut down. They're going after this stationery store, but you can get all that stuff at Walmart or Target. So why was it okay to go into the Selma Walmart where there was 150 people and buy all of these little subcategories, but you couldn't go to any little mom and pop store where you'd have one or two people in the store at one time? The same thing, when I saw that, I thought to myself, it's just a matter of time we're going to get a lecture from either Michael Bloomberg or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, and sure enough, Bill Gates came out and said they're doing a wonderful job.
So this is the other incident other than the NBA that made me angry. Just being reminded that Bill Gates came out and defended China, where he has made billions, if not tens of billions of dollars off of China. And he defends them when they've inflicted a pandemic that killed millions and millions of people.
He still does. And so did Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci, as we said, used Echo Health to reroute his weird ideas about gain of function, then lied under oath that it wasn't gain of function. And then when some poor little senator says, can you name one animal that ever had the SARS COVID-19 virus before a man or a human did? No, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. So he was not telling the truth about the origins. In fact, remember when Tom Cotton, I think that was in 2020, it was maybe in June, he just said in a statement in Congress, I think we've got to look at the idea it leaked from this lab.
Yeah.
The New York Times, everybody said that he was a conspiracy nut, and they demonized him.
You know, what's interesting is that I'm very lucky to get to speak to a lot of different types of people within conservative America as editor of Breitbart and host of a popular morning radio show. And I'll tell you, the commonality of those who were telling me, both privately and on my show, that the lab theory was still in play, it was the smartest people in Washington.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't the most reactionary and necessarily the best activists. It was the smartest, most thoughtful people were saying, I still think it's that lab.
Because look at the way you'd have to think. You'd have to say, I'm a very bright, inductive person, and China says it either came from a bat or a pangolin, but we've never found a bat or a pangolin that actually had this disease.
Yeah.
But there is a virology 4 lab that has had a prior leak that is a sizable part of it is under control of the Chinese military. We know they have engaged in gain of function. People in that lab got ill. They did not tell anybody about it. They were allowing people from ground zero to go all over Europe and the United States for 2 weeks until we slapped down a travel ban, which they called racist. But it has nothing to do with that lab. You have to be almost insane to believe it.
Yeah. And the globalists have let China get away with it.
Yeah.
And
worse was the World Health Organization. They called anybody who doubted their narrative. Remember that Mr. Tedros said it's not transmissible between humans.
That's
China's
right. For at least a good month.
Yeah.
They maintain that.
And it's racist. The travel ban is racist.
Even though Taiwan was saying it was transmissible that way, and China was saying not. And they took the China
Dr.
party
Fauci
line.
said that, I wouldn't worry too much about masks are of no value. It's not going to come over here. It's not going to do much. He downplayed it. And then he said, I would wear a mask. And then finally he ended up 2 masks.
Yeah.
And then 60% herd immunity will be very difficult. Well, now we're going to need 70, and then we're going to need 80.
But it all serves to protect China, who are paymasters for so many of these.
Well, protect themselves, too. They had so much money. Michael Bloomberg, remember, he was running for office. He insulted everybody. He was the worst candidate in the history of the Democratic Party.
Unbelievable.
I mean, all the farmers I know hated him because he said, you just drop a plant in the ground and anybody can grow it, any idiot. And he said that China was said that it was a constitutional system that was accountable to its voters. And he didn't tell us that he had over $10 billion invested to start up Chinese-affiliated startup companies. And he didn't say that. And he could have been easily the President of the United States at one moment. And look at Hunter Biden. We talked earlier, but just think of all the people in the news. LeBron James, check, China. General Milley, check, talking to his Chinese. I was thinking that the other day. I thought, wow, so we're on the edge of war, and Germany's a hostile power, and General Marshall's worried about FDR. He's having an affair with Lucy Mercer. He's in a wheelchair. He's kind of wants us to get us in a war with Germany. He's too close. He hates the isolationists. Maybe George Marshall should call up. He should call up General Halder of the Wehrmacht.
Yeah.
Say, I'll tell you when Roosevelt's going to attack you.
This is the concept that I refer to as Team Pangolin, because people started rooting for it to be the pangolin, even though the evidence was starting to suggest that it was the lab. And then there were some people who were on Team Lab thinking, well, I don't know, I'm not going to discredit the lab. But if it's the lab, then it's Fauci's fault and China's fault. I mean, it's the pangolin. It's just this horrible circumstance, and we all need to vanquish the virus as best we can, by locking down and wearing 17 masks.
You know what's really scary is that it's, in the Republic, it's a very famous passage when Socrates is made to say, well, what if, essentially the argument, well, what if people won't listen to more distinguished, brighter people? And is it okay to say something that in its details are false because its essence is true? I.e., could you lie about the details of solar and wind because the ultimate truth, it's better to have solar or wind?
Right.
So that's, the noble lie. So that's what all this is about. The left has bought into that for centuries. And you look at, just to get off topic, the Rittenhouse trial that's going on today. When I first heard of that, I was told the following. I thought, wow, this is bizarre. A white supremacist, 17 years old, crossed many state lines after he bought an assault weapon, military style, and then he went and he slaughtered 3 innocent people. That was pretty much the thing. And then just like the collusion hoax, just like the virus hoax, in bits and pieces.
Of unspecified race, by the way.
Yes, unspecified race, or a group of noble white people demonstrating on behalf of that. And then we found out Kenosha was 20 miles away, and his whole family lived in Kenosha except for his mother. The gun was legal. He was not a white supremacist. One of the victims was a pathological pedophile who's multi-felon, let out of hospital that day after trying to kill himself. The other person was intoxicated, gun owner, had been arrested numerous times, and the other felon that tried to kill him with a skateboard said he was going to gut his own brother. He was a felon, and the gun was legal, of course, and the whole thing fell apart. And I thought, is anybody going to apologize? No, because the ends were so noble, you see.
Yeah, and it's just the greatest act of modern racism is a white guy goes to a Black Lives Matter riot and he shoots three white criminals. I mean, it's an amazing thing.
I know it. It's Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot. It's poor Trayvon that was walking innocently until he was murdered by George Zimmerman, the white Hispanic. And then you ask yourself, why do they do this? And I guess the answer is they don't find enough ammunition in the real world.
Yeah.
So they have to create these fantasies because no one wants to listen to what they have to sell or to buy what they have to sell anymore.
I want to go back to the concept of globalism, which you write about in the book very eloquently. What is the history of globalism? It seems to start with one of these noble lies, and then it ends up in coercion, and then it ends up in failure. It doesn't seem to have a lot of great records to speak of. The World Health Organization.
It was always a lie. I think the first globalist was Alexander the Great. After he slaughtered Greeks, and then he slaughtered Asians, then he slaughtered Persians, then he slaughtered Indians. I'm not trying to bash him. He did a number of things. He said he was going to create the brotherhood of man.
He slaughtered everyone, but I'm not going to bash him yet.
And we're going to have an ecumenical. Ecumenical is a nice Greek word.
Yeah.
An oikomene, he said. And then we had, of course, the Roman Empire. And that famous passage in Tacitus, he said when the British national liberationist says to the Roman you make a desert and you call it peace. And then we had the Napoleonic system. He's going to conquer and kill 2 million people. And then we had the Third Reich, and we had all of this, the EU. So the problem with all these systems is that they're only as strong as the weakest link. They're supposedly constitutional and democratic, but they're made up of members that are non-democratic. And so you end up in a farce. You end up in Secretary of State Blinken asking the UN to investigate whether we were racist in the aftermath of George Floyd, or the International Criminal Court will adjudicate whether an artillery strike was legal in Afghanistan.
Well, why would someone in Ohio want to give power to a UN bureaucrat in Brussels?
Well, none of them would. That's why they have to be lied to, and they're told, you in Ohio, you lost your job, Youngstown is back because you didn't get with it. And we've got elites just like us the world over, and we're going to change the way. You're going to have one child, you're going to live in a high-density apartment, you're going to take mass transit, we're going to teach you about transgenderism, we're going to teach you about racism, we're going to teach you about climate change. We're not going to give you the tools of analysis in college to think for yourself. And then we're going to be exempt from all this. Plato, 350 years before Christ talked about the guardians, they have to be exempt. And so we're going to live in Malibu, and we're going to live in Woodside and the Upper West Side, and we're going to tell you what to do and how to organize your life, where we fly 400 jets to Glasgow to discuss climate change, 1,000 limousines. That's Prince Charles and Meghan Markle and all the people that yell at us. They don't have any intention of living like... I really liked Obama. He went to Glasgow and he said, there's going to be a lot of hardship. I mean, the guy is so dense in the sense that this destroyed Jimmy Carter. Even though he never used the word malaise. He had a malaise speech, and I heard it when I was a young guy. It was a downer. And Obama gives that again. He says, you in the middle class are going to have to be happy with less. As if we're not already getting less with Obama. I mean, I'm thinking with Biden.
It's interesting because Biden had his dark winter speech, and that was like at his peak of popularity, and seemed to go straight downhill from there.
I know, and I thought I should say to Obama, but Biden must have heard you because he's doubled gas prices and we can't find anything on the shelves, and we're suffering just like you want us to. But the thing I really liked was when he always said, and I'm so noble because it's going to affect, in some ways, it's going to affect you more than me because I have the wealth and the power and the prestige to get around it. And I'm thinking, well, why don't you not get around it? Why don't you say, I'm closing down Colorama Mansion to live only in Martha's Vineyard? Or I promise to only fly private 10 days a year. But
who pays for globalism?
Let's see, it's 7 billion people. I mean, as wealthy as these people are, they don't have the aggregate wealth of the average people in the world.
But that's what it seems like. A lot of it is middle America pays for globalism in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we're paying for it right now. We're paying for, well, one element of globalism is no borders. And I can tell you that as a professor at Cal State, I paid a lot of attention to people who came in with no English facility, they needed enormous help in language and healthcare and education, legal help. As we're speaking right now, we probably could have power at about 5 cents a kilowatt had we just gone nuclear, built more hydro, and did natural gas. California's got so much natural gas, they don't know what to do with it. But if you're going to basically dismantle all those sources or freeze them, and you're going to go to wind and solar, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg gives a damn what he pays for his power bill.
Yes. And that's the risk of giving more power to these people who are so disconnected.
Yeah. You cannot give power to those people.
One thing that's interesting is the obsession with the concept of world citizenship. When the people who are in charge of America right now are failing our citizens in a lot of ways, not relative to the rest of the world, but relative to what we could be. I mean, you just note this with the prices of energy. The prices of food are skyrocketing at the moment. Our school system seems to get worse every year. These should be fundamentals, and we're not solving problems. I mean, we were making fun earlier about high-speed rails. I was promised a high-speed rail from LA to the Bay Area my whole life, from LA to Vegas. What I got, Elon Musk dug 1 mile of tunnel. Like that's what we got in LA. It's ridiculous.
They told us that technology, your iPhone, your apps. We're going to make life so much more efficient. Some ways they have. But if that were true, then why is the middle class shrinking and disposable income is shrinking and the percentage of a family budget for a mortgage is increasing? And the answer is that they're not empirical. They're driven, as all ideologues are, by deductive, predetermined ideologies. And climate change, you can't talk to them about, well, maybe there's some uncertainty here, and maybe the climate is warming, but we don't know what percentage is attributable to humans, so let's be very careful before we alter the economic system that will destroy the lives.
Yes.
Just like when you're trying to tell them about COVID, 99.9 people under the age of 60 will not die from it. Let's not kill a lot of people through missed exams, missed procedures, psychological problems, suicides, drug abuse. But you can't.
Yeah.
Because they're ideologues, and they're not empirical, and they do a lot of damage. So when you turn over your country to these people, and they're mostly unelected, then the standard of living does not rise commiserately with the advances in technology.
As powerful as the U.S. government and our administrative state is at the moment, arguably the corporations are more powerful and they're much less accountable. I feel like America is moving into this sort of oligarchy where you've got this combination of corporate America and the administrative state that's really controlling the country, and they are surpassing the citizens in terms of their power if they haven't already done so. What do you think of this concept?
I talk about something similar. It's kind of like that old idea of the panopticon where you could see all around. A very small percentage of the population is involved in corporate governance, the corporate state, Wall Street finance, academia, the people who run K through 12, entertainment, professional sports. But if you think about it in Hollywood, those are all the levers of communication and influence in the country. So when you get up in the morning, you turn on your iPhone, you deal with what Facebook and Google, to the extent they'll even reorder the search results for a predetermined ideological view. If you look at television, it's corporate. If your university has basically become a corporate. Many of them have. K through 12 are products of this educational. So it's really amazing that the Americans have for so long remained so independent and so feisty when all of these people are A, not subject to any consequences of what they project onto others, and B, they have enormous power that's not based really on their merit. They have this credentialing system that you get some letters after your name, but nobody ever asked the guy with a bachelor's degree in English or a bachelor's degree in, history or even computers, what do you actually know about this subject? And the answer is I can't know very much because I never really studied the subject. I studied other things under the guise of the subject.
Right.
And so that they have enormous power, and a lot of great minds, starting with Plato, but even people, like Machiavelli and David Hume, Adam Smith, Tocqueville, and especially these nihilists that are kind of crazy, like Nietzsche, Spengler, people like that, Hegel. They were all talking about a progression to sort of a totalitarian system where you have an elite that have a monopoly, like the Mycenaeans, or Near Eastern kingdoms, or the pharaohs, as opposed to the city-state or the Roman agrarian republic. So when you get all of this knowledge and all of this power, this elite, the weird thing about it is, though, they got what they wanted, but they're very vulnerable. They're very vulnerable. And they are freaked out by Virginia. They were freaked out by 2016. They have no idea what the people are thinking. You get a power outage, they panic. They're empty shelves, they panic. You talk to people out here, if you shut down the supply, they would survive. They would. And you talk to people in Palo Alto, they are terrified. You talk about COVID out here, this was a very heavily infected COVID area. And yet people, they didn't downplay it, but they had a tragic view of life. They said, you know what, I got to feed my family. I got to get in that truck. I'm sorry. If I get it, I'll deal with it. They weren't, I'm going to stay in there and you put that Amazon package 10 feet away from me. And I'm walking down to the beach and look, that little special needs child, and I have a special needs granddaughter, doesn't have a mask on. And go tell her she's going to ruin my life. That's how we've created this group, this insular, privileged, narcissistic, neurotic, consular class. And you can see what happens when you turn them over. Look at who is Biden surrounded with? He's surrounded with these people. And they say things that are absolutely indicative of the fact they've never been out. So we're short oil and gas because the price is doubled. You ask the Secretary of Energy, what are you going to do about pumping more gas? That's ridiculous, she says. Then we say that it's a satanic fuel and Russia and Saudis are evil, but would you please pump more gas or oil? Inflation. Everybody knows it's too much money placing too many goods. And then the advisor of the President of the United States, Ron Klain, says, he tweets, it's just a high-class problem.
Right.
Pete Buttigieg says supply side is just, it's going to affect procrastinators. Jen Psaki says, well, you didn't get your treadmill in time.
Yeah.
I mean, these people have contempt for the people who suffer from their bankrupt ideas, and yet they're stupid. And they're like H.G. Wells, remember the time machine, the Eloi, and then there were the Morlocks. We're the Morlocks, unfortunately, but these Eloi are just completely defenseless. And when they get their way and things start cracking up, they don't know how to react. The border, Mayorkas, this is just as secure as it's ever been. They ask him, well, why are you not vaccinating people, but you're vaccinating citizens? Well, it's different environments.
Yes.
It's ludicrous.
So you see the modern left, and they're so neurotic, and they're so joyless, and they're so increasingly dishonest and anti-science. You'd have to think that will leave the playing field very open for a sharp, agile conservative movement to fill the void and get some victories electorally, but also culturally. Are you optimistic, or do you see that all of these societal all of these core institutions working against?
I see them all against it. There's a very thin margin of error. You know, when I was young, I used to read all of the Tolkien books, and there's a passage in Tolkien when Gandalf the Wizard says, we're very close, they have so much power, and we cannot make a mistake. We're on the race. And so that's where we are. We have the people, and we have the people who are the most commonsensical, but they have so many institutions. So you have a guy like Donald Trump, and he blows up a field of 16 talented Republicans and saw things they didn't that we've been talking about. So he gets in there and he does some wonderful things, but he has no margin of error, yet he doesn't understand that. So if you're going to get, you don't want to get mad, you want to get even. So when he's tweeting about Fauci throws like a girl, or he's tweeting about some horse face or something, he's a distraction. It's funny, and I think it was great in some ways. I don't like the cruelty, but my point is, he had everything, and he had the combativeness. He understood the left, but he had no margin of error. So he was always dumbfounded. They would never impeach me. Yes, they will. They wouldn't impeach me when I'm a private citizen. Yes, they will. This Russian hoax, nobody. Yes, they will. They hate you. They have the power to destroy you. You have no moments. You have no second chances. You can't say a wrong word. You've got to say, get even. Don't appoint Omarosa. Don't appoint some of the appointments he made. Don't talk to these people. They want to destroy you. So can you find a leader who has the contempt for what they're trying to do and really has affection for the people, but is so disciplined and so canny that he won't make the mistakes, because the left will try to destroy anybody, and time is getting short. So do we want a Romneyism? No. Do we want Bushism? I'm afraid no, we don't. That's a corporate system, and Trump blew that up to the chagrin of the never-Trump corporate insiders. But we do need somebody who has Trump's fire in the belly and wants to fight 24/7, but he's more strategically inclined. how do I best get to where I want to get, rather than to fight all of these little fights, you know. Or, you know, if I were to advise someone, when Trump had people in, if I think Haiti's a shithole, then I wouldn't say that in front of people who are going to go right outside, and that's going to be the media narrative, and I don't get my message out. And that's what he did. And I don't blame him because he was a political novice, but the Republican Party has no margin of error. So when we're coming into an election cycle, they've got to get the best candidates, and they're getting good ones, much better, in the House, in the Senate. And the old guard has got to go because they gave us this caricature of the country club, white elite, Romney, even though he was a good guy, I mean, personally, but it was so easy for the left to destroy those people.
Yes.
You know, they put their dogs on your car, they have elevators, all this. So I don't know whether somebody like DeSantis will end up like Scott Walker, the great Governor Hope that let everybody, I mean, he didn't pan out. Or he'll have all of Trump's strengths and emotions and fire in the belly, but it'll be much more discreet in how he marshals his energies and focuses his attacks. But I think everybody agrees. Everybody I talk to, I think you've had the same experience. They said, we like the Trump agenda. We don't know whether it can be sustained without Trump. Trump is a player. If he wants a nomination, he'll get nominated. But we might want to suggest to him he be a senior statesman, rest on his laurels at 78, and make sure that he is involved in the process so we get somebody who has his agenda and his fire, but we want somebody who will get even and not get angry, or get angry and even.
Victor Davis Hanson, The Dying Citizen. It's a must-read, and I think it's going to be a historical document, just like everything Professor Hanson writes. You've been incredibly generous with your time. Thank you for inviting us to your home, and I hope to make this a regular thing.
Thank you.